The Saturday morning market in Ballymena still attracts a good crowd of shoppers, eager for a bargain, and the potato stall of Norman Baird is always a busy one. The big man from Ballyclare has at least a dozen different varieties for the public to choose from. His produce is fresh, reasonably priced, and so he should always have plenty of customers, for the island on which we live has long been associated with the potato. For many years they have been an important part of our food chain, our economy, and indeed these days they will be found in almost every home. Potatoes, like flax, are an ancient crop, believed to have been first grown 2,500 years ago. They most likely originated in South America, for it is known that Spanish conquerors looking for gold in Peru found the natives cultivating and eating tubers, from which our ordinary potatoes are descended. They came to Ireland about the same time as the Spanish Armada, and by the 1700s were the basic food of the large population of Ireland. The potato was well suited to our climate, and as a result the population grew at an extremely fast rate. The potato was by this time the main food crop of the nation. Disaster struck in 1845 to 1847, when blight destroyed most of the country's potatoes, resulting in the Great Irish Potato Famine and the loss of 1 million people. I often wondered why the famine was called the Great Famine. There was certainly nothing great about 1 million people starving to death. I recently found out that there had been many crop failures in the previous 100 years, with many deaths from starvation, but nothing to match the scale of this one in the mid-1800s. A famous stretch of highway between Dungiven and Maghera is the Glen Shane Pass, and at its height is 1,200 feet above sea level. Just on the other side of the mountain can still be seen the remains of 6 stone cottages. Some of the older residents in the area can still remember when these ruins were still recognised as houses. The 6 sets of potato rigs are still visible, and it is likely that the blighted potatoes in these rigs were never dug. No one is quite sure what happened to the families who lived here. They either died or emigrated around 1847. Potato growers are still afraid of the blight, although these days they have a powerful weapon: chemical sprays to ensure that their crop stays blight-free. The modern basic principle of growing and harvesting has changed little. The preparation of the seedbed begins with pulling a plough through the ground, turning over the top layer of soil and exposing it to the weather and the sun. While larger and capable of much more work these days, the basic principle of the plough has altered little since it was invented by the Romans 2,000 years ago. This modern 3-furrow reversible plough is capable of turning over an acre of ground every hour, a sharp contrast to a century ago, when a man and horses would have been hard pushed to cover that amount of ground in a day. No period of time in farming history has seen so many improvements as there have been during the 20th century. If the next 100 years were to bring as many changes as the past 100, then it would be impossible to imagine what farming will be like then. Today, one thing is certain, for in spite of all the modern machinery, there are still men who like to keep the old ways of farming alive. Men like Liam Davidson and Danny Matthews, who are proud to show off their skills of their forefathers, ploughing with their horses. During a day's work, a ploughman and his team would have walked 10 miles. Many famous names are associated with farm improvements over the years, and when it comes to ploughing, one name worth a mention is that of John Deere. John Deere was born in Vermont, USA in 1804, and after leaving school served his time as a blacksmith. By the 1830s, conditions in Vermont became depressed, and facing bankruptcy, the young John Deere joined thousands of other pioneers who were heading west. Deere settled in Illinois, and within a couple of days had built a blacksmith's forge and was busy serving the community. There was plenty of work, shoeing horses and oxen and repairing ploughs and other equipment for the pioneer farmers. From them he learned of the serious problem they had encountered in trying to farm the fertile soil of the Midwest. The cast iron ploughs they had brought with them from the east were designed for the light sandy New England soil. The rich Midwestern soil clung to the plough bottom, and every few steps it was necessary to scrape the soil from the plough. John Deere studied this problem and became convinced that a plough with a highly polished mouldboard ought to clean itself as it turned the furrow slice. He fashioned such a plough in 1837, using the steel from a broken saw blade. Deere had hit the jackpot, and news of his self-polishers quickly spread among the grateful farmers. Within 10 years, John Deere's small factory was producing over 1,000 ploughs a year, and the former blacksmith was well on his way to becoming a millionaire. More than 160 years after his breakthrough invention, which helped make the cultivation of the prairies possible, his name is still prominent on the side of farm machines all over the world. This 1936 John Deere petrol TVO tractor is part of the vintage machinery collection of Garva man Tom McMaster. Before the Second World War, tractors like these would have been owned by only the most prosperous of farmers, and while little more than a mechanised horse, this model would have been capable of ploughing 4 acres in a day. It had no hydraulic system, but had a pulley drive and a high and low gearbox. Early April 2002, the weather is still cold, damp and dark. The trees and hedges as yet are showing little sign of putting on their spring coats. Dougie Nevin has worked on the Linton farm at Gortyclochan near Garva for the past 15 years. Dougie is a reliable and capable worker and is at present preparing this 10-acre field for a crop of Disraeli potatoes. The 95 horsepower Ford and the 3-furrow plough will have no problem turning over this field in one day. The ring of trees in the background is an ancient fort, possibly as old as 2,000 years, and one of several in this area. A court grave as old as 5,000 years and standing stones, thought to be the oldest in Ireland, are also in this locality. This shot of Gortyclochan fort was taken in the summertime. A fort was like a small village, walled with a ring of stones and earth, and would have been the homes for several families. Ireland at that time was a dangerous place, with wild animals including wolves roaming the countryside. The men and women who farmed and tended their animals in those far-off days were tough people. They had to be to survive, and they helped to form us into the civilised society which we are today. The village of Burnfoot on the banks of the River Roe is nestled between the towns of Limavady and Dungiven, and it is here that we meet James Ray and his son James, who grow 150 acres of potatoes yearly. The Rays in local language would be described as big pretty men. The tractor operator started ploughing at 7 o'clock this morning and will plough this 20 acres before nightfall. Not many locals can remember this field being ploughed before, and it is certainly many years since it wasn't potatoes. The tractor is a New Holland 125, 125 horsepower, attached to a 4-furrow reversible plough. Reversible means that when he has finished his furrows, the plough turns over the body and he can start again down the same way as he came up. This means that there are no hints or backs and the field finishes up level. This process also saves time, for unlike Dougie, he doesn't have to drive around the windings to start the next furrow. This ground is a bit stony, and the spring release mechanism to protect the plough can be seen working here. Were this not here and the plough struck a big stone or a tree root, the powerful tractor would pull on, causing all sorts of damage to the plough. By the 5th of May, the countryside has taken on the spring look, and we are in an 8-acre field at Killycurgan on the outskirts of Garva. This field was also ploughed in March and is now getting the final preparation for the planting of the potato seed. The rotavator chews up the ploughed ground, which is very dry, ideal for planting potatoes, and just to make it extra fine, this power harrow is used, breaking up any clods that the rotavator might have missed. Mervyn Boyd is sprinkling the seed with a chemical powder. This is to prevent scab. Mervyn grows different varieties of good eating potatoes every year and is well known for supplying the local market. The Case International is 5 years old, producing 95 horsepower, and the planter is nearly 30 years old. When this Ransom potato planter first appeared on farms here in the early 1970s, many small farmers were still using the bell dropper to plant their seed. The seed being planted here is King Edward's, and this crop will go to the Canary Islands to help feed the thousands of holidaymakers who flock there every year. By this time the Rays are also well underway with planting their vast crop, and are at present in a 50-acre field at Myroe. Myroe is an area close to the sea near McGilligan. The potato drill here is 3/4 of a mile long, and when the planter has made its round trip, it has planted 1 acre. This is good land and will produce a big crop of potatoes, but it must be cultivated when conditions are right. If the ground is too dry, it will form into hard clods. If it is wet, it will be too sticky to work in. As at Killycurgan, this ground was also ploughed in March, and initially goes through the same process for preparation, with a few modifications, as we will see. This 110 horsepower Fate tractor is 7 or 8 years old and is rotavating the ground. This rotavator takes 8.5 feet of ground, and at the back is a crumbling bar to break up the clods, making the ground even finer. Every bit helps. The next machine on the scene is the bed former. The bed former is like a huge plough and makes a bed like a large drill. After this comes the power tiller, which is pulled by the New Holland. The power tiller is like another rotavator and forms another bed behind it. The ground is now very fine and almost ready for planting. The land here is sandy and would have very little stones, but clods of earth as hard as stones, and some as big as your fist, would be present here and would be lifted by the harvester along with the potatoes when the crop is being dug. A clever invention in recent years has been the de-stoner or declodder, and this is the 4th process today before the seed is planted. Costing £28,000, this unique machine lifts all the clods and stones, rolls them up in a conveyor belt onto another conveyor which drops them into the furrow made by the power tiller. They are buried to a depth of 10 inches, well out of the way of the potato harvester. After the potatoes are harvested, the stones are returned to their original position in the soil. It is well known that stones are important to the ground, acting like storage heaters and keeping the ground warm for longer and aiding drainage. The crumbling stars on the destoner sort out the stones and clods from the earth. There are 280 of them here, easily broken. They cost £10.75 each, so no wonder potatoes are expensive. At last the field is ready for planting. These seed potatoes are called navan and will produce a crop of large white potatoes, good for eating, boiled, mashed or in chips. The back-breaking labour of carrying bags has long been replaced by machines. The seed are brought to the field in bulk and conveyed into the planter by belts. The planter must be filled to capacity, for as we said, it will have planted an acre of seed before it is refilled. The half-ton bags of fertiliser are filled into the front of the planter. This is also a relatively new operation, for manure used to be sowed from the back. You can see here how fine the ground is. Given that the weather stays good and there are no breakages, this 50 acres will be planted in 4 days. The lay-by above White Park Bay, between Bushmills and Ballycastle, is a popular stopping place for tourists visiting the scenic north coast of Ireland. Erected here is a plaque to a local man, John Clark, for his contribution to breeding different varieties of potatoes. It is now the first week of June, and with the McGilligan potatoes barely through the ground, the McCurdy brothers have already started digging a crop of Home Guards, an early white potato with a very good flavour. Dan McCurdy, whose farm is beside White Park Bay, has been growing potatoes for the past 40 years, and this year he and his 2 sons have planted 100 acres. The harvester is a Keeverland, lifting 2 drills at a time, and requires 4 operators who are lifting off stones, potato tops and clods, even though this ground was destoned at planting time. The ground at this time of the year is dry, so the potatoes are nice and clean. This crop was planted in February, and as this land is beside the sea, there will be little or no frost. 100 years ago, the months of June and July were known as the hungry months, and poor people had to pawn all that they owned to buy food. In those days, the new crop would not have been touched until at least the middle of August. The McCurdys will not dig potatoes all day. They will only dig what they require today, because as well as growing, they also pack them into plastic bags and market them around the local shops and supermarkets. These are known as new potatoes and will command a much higher price than the ones dug later on in the season. The whole family, including Dan's wife, is engaged in the picking and bagging process. The elevator is also turning the potatoes so that the pickers will see any bad or discoloured bits. Each bag contains 2.5 kilos or 5 pounds. The family know almost exactly how many bags will be required today. One drawback that potatoes harvested this early in the year have is that they do not store well for long periods and must be eaten within a few days of digging. Dan's marketplace would be most of North Antrim and as far inland as Cullybackey. His brother John helps out on the lorry. Neighbours would also call at the farm, knowing that the produce is always fresh. Tourists and day trippers are also a useful source of income. By the beginning of August, the blossoms have appeared on this crop of Navan potatoes. This is the field at Burnfoot, which we saw being ploughed, and looking like it is set to produce a good healthy crop. James Ray Jr. is spraying the potatoes every 7 days. The first spraying of the year would have been done in June. This would have been solely to kill weeds and would have been performed only once. James is now spraying to kill blight. However, every second time that he sprays, he will add an insecticide to the blight chemicals. This is to kill aphids, which are small insects like greenfly. Aphids will also attack barley as well as potatoes. The tank on the sprayer holds 1,200 litres. Another one at the front holds a further 800. so every time James leaves the farm he is carrying 2,000 litres of spray. He would be capable of covering 50 to 60 acres in a day. This self-propelled sprayer costs £90,000 and can take 28 drills at a time. It is capable of spraying between 200 and 300 acres in a day. In the 19th century, growers had very little knowledge of what caused disease in potatoes. The blight, which hit Ireland in the 1840s, also caused crop failures across Europe, and farmers had no idea how to fight it. Indeed, that blight wiped out 90% of the potatoes in Belgium. However, by the early 20th century, many ingenious forms of defence against fungus and pests had been developed. Nowadays, blight is virtually unheard of. Harvesting the main crop of potatoes in this part of the country usually begins about the end of September, although this man, Ronnie Cochran, who farms at Temple Moor near Limavady, has been digging potatoes since the middle of June. Ronnie, like the McCurdys at White Park Bay, also bags and sells through the local shops and supermarkets. He must be able to supply the market the whole year round, so that means growing early potatoes like British Queens and Home Guards. Ground this far inland would be too liable to frost and would not be suitable for early crops, so Ronnie rents ground around the Ballykelly area, where the sea breezes from the shores of Lough Foyle keep frost away and allows planting by late February or early March. Ronnie Cochran grows about 40 acres of potatoes every year, and at this time is digging Kerr's Pinks, which are now the most popular eating potato in Ireland. He also grows Navan, which are large potatoes, sold mainly to the catering trade for chips. This harvester is a Kieverland Fawn 1700 and just digs one drill at a time. This machine is about 10 years old, requires 3 or 4 pickers, and would be capable of harvesting 1 to 1.5 acres per day. 10 years ago it would still have been common to see people gathering potatoes in a field, but those days are now gone, and indeed farmers would tell you now that it is almost impossible to get people to work on a farm. About the same time, in the big field at Myroe, the Rays have also started digging their crop of Navan. 2002 was not a very dry year, and the harvester at this point is picking up a lot of large wet clods, which makes heavy and constant work for the pickers. Other areas of the field are still quite dry in spite of the wet year, and here we can see fairly clean potatoes coming along the belts. These belts are covered with a rubber-like coating so that they do not damage the potatoes. Care is also taken when the crop falls into the boxes, for the conveyor moves up and down so as to give the potatoes as short a fall as possible. This large Kieverland harvester, a UN 2200, pulled and powered by the New Holland, is capable of harvesting up to 10 acres in a day. That would be about 200 tons. The manpower required here would be 1 tractor driver, 4 people on the harvester picking off clods, stones and potato tops, and several more tractor drivers drawing the potatoes back to the farm. Big long trailers like this one can carry 10 1-ton boxes. The Kieverland harvester is designed to dig 2 drills at a time, but James Ray has cleverly adjusted the situation so that it digs double that. James Jr. is digging 2 more drills and depositing the crop into the bottom of the drills that the harvester is digging. It would be possible to have 4 drills in here. This is a similar operation to de-stoning and is called windrowing, and as you can see when the harvester comes along, it picks these potatoes up along with the 2 drills that it is digging. Early potato harvesters first appeared in Canada as far back as the 1940s. As we are close to the sea here, there are always plenty of seagulls scavenging for anything they can find. In spite of modernisation, breakdowns are still a common occurrence. When I was a schoolboy and gathering potatoes, it was always a great delight if the digger broke down, and if we happened to see a large stone in a drill, we would have covered it up with earth, hoping to halt the digging operation for a while. The tractor operator will have to level his load before starting on his 12-mile journey back to Burnfoot. After this time, the weather got very bad and little or no potatoes were dug during October and November. It was mid-December before the fields at Burnfoot were dug. Thankfully, there has been little frost, although the large drills in which potatoes are grown nowadays would keep out all but a severe frost. The rays are now finishing off their final field and are thankful that all the crop has been saved. Many potato men were still digging in February and March of 2003. As soon as the digging has finished, the sorting and picking process begins. The demand for his particular brand of potato will determine how much of his vast store James will be able to sell. The 2002 season was not such a bad one, market-wise, with a good demand for the Navan and with reasonable prices. The boxes are being loaded onto the box tipper. So far, these potatoes have not been touched since they came in from the field. The box tipper automatically tips the box to allow just a certain amount to drop onto the belt, which start the potatoes on the next stage of their journey. They travel over this roller bar, which cleans any earth off them. Potatoes harvested in the sandy ground at my row during dry weather would be very clean, but there is quite a lot of dirt on these ones. As we can see, it's falling into the dump skip. This earth will be taken back to the field from where it came. The potatoes now fall down onto the jump sorter or jump riddler. The small ones below the size of 45mm drop through onto a lower level, and the larger ones, called the ware, carry on towards the pickers. The ware falls onto another belt where they are carefully examined. The pickers are looking for sunburn or damage, and any imperfect ones are discarded. These will go for animal feeding. This is another good example of the way the rollers can turn the potatoes around so that the men can see all of them. Old-time potato sorters had just a continuous web. The potatoes just sat there and pickers had to turn them manually. James Ray Sr. gives them a final look over as the now perfect ware head back into the boxes. Filling the potatoes back into the boxes is a fully automatic operation. The chute at first drops right down into the bottom of the box, giving the potatoes a short drop to prevent damage. A sensor on this conveyor allows it to rise and move as the box fills up. The small potatoes which have fallen through the riddler travel along another belt and into a 1-ton box. Half of these will be kept as seed for next year's crop. The other half will be sold on to the catering industry. Many hotels and restaurants now serve this size of potato cooked in its jacket. 2003 was one of the best summers for many years, with the months of July, August, September and October having a lot of good dry sunny weather and little rain. Some farmers were concerned that through this long dry spell, crops like potatoes might suffer. The Ray staff are back in the Myroe area again this year and are still digging Navan potatoes. They were soon to prove that any fear of a small crop was totally unfounded, for this was one of the largest crops of potatoes they had ever seen. This year there is a notable shortage of workers in the field, for James Ray has invested in a one-man operated potato harvester. The one man is driving the tractor. The harvester does the rest of the work by itself. A series of chain-driven pulleys, gears and belts drive the various mechanisms on this unique machine, which is more than half the labour force from other years. This harvester cost £40,000 and could harvest 200 tons in a day. That would be about 10 acres. Before digging begins, the dead potato tops have to be cut. This machine not only cuts the tops, but chops them up and throws them out to the side, where they will be well away from the harvesting operation. These potato tops were killed about a week ago using a spray of acid. If tops were sprayed in the morning, they would be almost dead by evening. The new harvester takes the potatoes from the ground in the same way as the others did, and is digging 2 drills at a time. Windrowing can also be used with this machine, but James Ray has chosen not to, for the weather is still good and there is plenty of time. Another reason why there is less of a hurry is that as the crop is so big, space at the farm is running out. The potatoes, earth, weeds and any remaining tops travel up the web, the earth drops through the belted conveyor back onto the ground. These metal spikes, which are spring-loaded, catch any remaining tops or weeds and force them under the belt, where they also fall back to the ground. The soil that remains will drop through the next conveyor belt. The digging and cleaning process is now complete, and only potatoes are coming out at this end. These fall onto another belt, which takes them into the boxes on the trailer. During the last 200 years, there have been many inventions which have cut the workforce on the farms, and I suppose that this is just another step in that evolution process. The non-stop cycle of drawing the loads of potatoes back to the farm at Burnfoot continues, and with fields this far away, James could expect some help from neighbouring farmers. Willie Ray, now in his 104th year, comes out to the field to inspect this abnormally large crop. Willie says that these potatoes were more like the size of turnips, and wondered if there would be a market for such a large amount. Sadly, just a few days after this picture was taken, the old man died. As the minister remarked at his funeral, Willie's lifetime had seen more changes than at any other time in history. The market town of Ballymoney in North Antrim is the home of Ballymoney Foods, and this is one of the outlets for James's stock of navins. This company, going now for over 30 years, makes frozen potato products such as oven chips, baby roast potatoes, straight cut chips, which would be most likely made from navin, catering chips, which would be made from a variety of potatoes called rooster, a large red potato with yellow flesh, and they also make microwave chips, which are ready in 3 minutes. Potato wedges with the skin still on have become popular in recent years. The baby roast potatoes would be the seed size which we saw at the sorting. In the boardroom of Ballymoney Foods is a large painting of Ballymoney's most famous son. King of the Roads, Joey Dunlop, was killed while racing in July 2000. In the town itself there is a memorial garden, and here is recorded Joey's many victories during his long career. The potatoes arrive from the farm by tractor in 1-ton boxes. This truck is carrying 26 tons loose, and they are taken into the factory by means of a conveyor belt. More conveyor belts at various heights take them into this large hopper which holds 26 tons. There are 6 of these, and the potatoes coming in at the minute are navins. They come out of the hopper onto this spiked roller bar which knocks off any earth, and then they travel down this waterway where they are washed. This young lady, Tracy Halliday, works in the lab, and she will check the quality of this product. When a new batch comes in, a random sample is passed over this conveyor. She is looking for rot, blight, damage or sunburn. A sample is taken into the lab to go through a number of tests to establish, firstly, if they are suitable, and secondly, what kind of chips they will produce. They have gone through a washer first, you will notice that these potatoes are very large, over 50 millimeters. Small potatoes are no use for chips. Next, they are checked for dry matter. The reading should be above 19 and below 24. These are reading 20.7, which is very good. The potatoes are peeled, and Tracy makes a single chip from the centre of 8 of them. These chips will be fried for 3 minutes. While they are frying, Tracy checks the rest of the basket for damage and rotten or hollow centres, which can be common, especially in very large potatoes. Tracy holds the fried chip against a chart to check for colour. These chips are acceptable, and the farmer who owned the potatoes can expect a bonus on his price. All this information is fed into a computer. This factory is one of the most modern of its kind in Europe, and because of its uncertain future, we were asked not to film the chip-making process. Hopefully things can be resolved and the 50 employees keep their jobs. The last of our pretty men to be featured comes from Bridgend in County Donegal. It is here that we meet the Harkin brothers, who have been growing potatoes since 1976, and this year grew 360 acres, as well as over 300 acres of cereal crop. This is the area where the biggest arable farm in Ireland is, 3,290 acres to be exact, and it once belonged to TBF Thompson from Garva. It is now the property of Donegal Creameries. Many of these fields are over 100 acres. The ones we are looking at now are below sea level and are very liable to flooding. So in this pump house, 3 giant pumps are always at the ready to pump the water back into Loch Swilly. The Harkins harvest their potatoes using this large self-propelled harvester. It cost €290,000, about £200,000. You can see here how fast it travels, and in good ground conditions would be capable of digging 17 acres in a day. The driver can keep an eye on its performance, for he has in the cab with him 5 television screens to monitor the procedure at different points. A top cutter is fitted to the front, and like the one at McGilligan, knocks the cut tops well out of the way. This machine is both wheel and track driven, with a wide rubber tyre on one side and a 10-foot rubber track on the other. The harvester is digging a crop of Kerr's pinks and requires 2 men picking off the potato tops and any clods or stones that might have escaped. The potatoes here drop into a bulk trailer rather than boxes and are taken back to the farm. This load would be about 12 tons. We noticed from the field a strangely shaped building on the top of the nearby hill, and on investigation found that this was another ancient monument from a time long ago. Green and Alia, as this stone-built fort is called, is believed to have been built around the time of the birth of Christ. The builders were most likely attracted to this site by the presence of a prehistoric burial site, some 5,000 years old. I don't know how people can figure these things out, but of one thing there is no doubt, and that is from up here the view is truly amazing. 3 counties, Derry, Tyrone and Donegal, can be seen, and this is a fine view of the Foyle Bridge, built in the 1970s. The loads of Kerr's pinks arrive in from the field and are tipped onto this large hopper. The picking and sorting process is something similar to the one we saw at Burnfoot, only on a much larger scale. This Herbert sorter, recently installed, costing £240,000, is capable of processing a ton of potatoes every minute. The potatoes come off the hopper onto a cleaner. These were dug late on in the season when the ground was damp, but it must be understood they were only dug an hour ago. They travel on over the riddler and the small ones drop through. Kerr's pinks are not as large as Navan. The picked and sorted potatoes go back into the boxes ready to be shipped. These will go to a factory in Dublin where they will be washed, packed into 5 kilogram bags, sold through the supermarkets. The Harkin brothers supply potatoes all the year round and have 2 large cold rooms. Each can store 1,400 tonnes, so they should never run out of stock. These are the rooster potatoes which we saw at Ballymoney Foods, a red potato with yellow flesh, and are good boiled or chipped. By the beginning of December 2003, the Harkin brothers were shipping 4 loads a week. That would be about 100 tonnes. They feel that they would need to be selling a lot more than that. North of the border, James Ray's stock is almost at a standstill. James, not a man to panic, feels that they will start to move after Christmas. Farming in this part of the country has been on the decline for several years now, and one farming expert I spoke to predicts that in 3 years' time there will be no potatoes at all grown in this area. Let's hope that he is wrong.
If you have enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel for more content on Irish farming life. Please also drop a comment in the comment section below.